Another thing I should mention is that when we, two components, first of all, this is the clock spring on the steering wheel. Do not rotate this thing around, just mark it off somewhere on the back or something with a little mark down below where you can see where this thing lines up. And then secondly, you can see we've got a jack underneath this this steering column. These steering columns are notorious for sort of screwing up when falling out. So we just want to make sure that it's supported. It's also fairly heavy, so just make sure it's supported before you disconnect it from the actual frame. Okay, through a bit of finagling and judicious use of the bottle jack, we were able to get the steering column back up into position. So it wasn't a very easy task either, but like I said, just a little bit of patience and time, and you'll get it to fit back roughly into position. We'll start bolting it in next. The other thing I did, as you can see, is I attached that ground wire, which is pretty critical to get these ground wires back in place. And as you can see, we got a rat's nest of electrical stuff we have to hook up and a bunch of stuff that has to be mounted in. So we're going to work next on all this stuff under this side once we get that steering wheel column mounted back up. Okay, so on top of the steering wheel in the back here, before you cinch this up to its final resting place, make sure you reattach this white box at the back here. This electrical box back here is a little hard to get to once the steering wheel is in place. Okay, the next step in the process is to actually hang the steering column back up again. There'll be 4 bolts, and those four bolts will be one right here, and then one right down here. And then there's 2 bolts. One is this one right here, up in that big gold one right there. It's a 12 mil, and it's actually going to bind the frame and the drive or the steering mount. And then there's another bolt. That was the one I'd originally put on before, and it's right back over there. You can see it's the gray one, and I'd originally put that on there, but it just took a quick spin to get it back off again, and that peg has to go back through, and they get bolted on to the steering wheel. And how you lift it up, they put this nice little hanger in the back there. That's this little item here. So you can lift it up first by jacking it from the front and hang it on this thing, get it all into position. And then what I did was I jacked the back half up to get it to go into the right slots at the back. And now we're going to move on to actually connecting up all these loose connections down below here. Okay, one small component, this little electrical piece right here, has been reconnected back in, powering the stuff up top. Okay, so there's a few additional pieces that we've been doing here. We've mounted this black box on here, the electrical component here. We've attached these two with 2 screws, one here, one up here, just to tighten that up. And we've also put in this white component here that was hanging, that was loose. We attached that back on again. And then we also have started tightening up some of the upper electrical, such as this plug in here. You can see it's gone back in there. And we're going to continue to tighten up some of these electrical components and pieces back over here. And we're going to start working on mounting this back up finally. The roll on this side, getting it all in place, and putting this screw back in here for the air conditioning duct, or the duct for the heating and air conditioning. Okay, 3 additional pieces. This wire was mounted in over here. Behind here you can see there's a screw to hold that in, a screw to hold this in right here. And we mounted up the bolts for the roll frame. Okay, here's a couple other components that we added in. We attached this box right here with a screw down at the back there, and then under here we reattached the drain line for the condenser, the air conditioning condenser. It just has a compression clip on it that slides onto a port back in there. And then the other thing we did is up top we tightened up the air conditioning lines. Okay, so the next part in this process was to put this piece back on, which connects to the blower, and on the other side is the condenser unit. It took about 7 screws to get that piece in. And the other piece we did was the ECU unit over here, and reattach that for now. Okay, now we installed the 2 side supports for the frame, cross frame. It's got 2 nuts, 2 bolts on this side, and bolts over on this side over here. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4. There's actually a 5th stud down there. I don't have a bolt for it. Okay, one thing I did not mention is that there's a spring load on this particular vent cover right here. You can see it as it moves a little bit there. That spring load has to go on the inside of this side component before you put the air box together, if you've taken it out that far. Again, you don't have to take the air box out to get the dash off, but if you have taken off the air box, make sure you put that spring back inside here before you put this piece on. That's got to be a spring load, as you can see. Okay, so as you can see, we've attached one of the servos slash actuators slash motor, electric motor slash whatever the hell you want to call it. The way we did this was there's not much play in the rotation of the actual unit, and we know it was sort of set at the same place the other one was. So we spun it around until it actually lined up halfway, and put the unit in. It was actually set at the right point, so we sort of knew where that actual ductwork should be on the inside. But again, be careful when you're pulling these out. Make sure you understand where everything is, because it's going to be a little bit challenging to get it back into the right place. Okay, so this is the front air handling. It comes in 3 pieces. There's this piece under here for the venting, the side venting, and then there's this piece which is for the upper main vents on the passenger and driver side. And how these things go in, as you can see back over there, there are those clips, sort of push clips. There's one over there. And there's one back behind here. Those push clips, you just pry up the centerpiece. They're not really screws. You could try and screw them, but you usually just pry them up and they pop right out. And then you just put them back in 2 components. You put the outer piece in and then the inner piece. And that's all that's really holding this section in at this point in time. There's some clips on the side. You can see they're a little bit damaged on the side that hold that piece in. And this just sort of toggles and falls forward once those pieces are out. These 2 little pins are just basically plastic. They just pop in and out again. It's a center pop system, so when you pop out the center, the rest sort of comes out, and then you push them back in 2 pieces. Okay, so we have reattached the 2 servos or actuators or whatever you want to call them, and we've plugged in the electrical components for each of these. And then the other piece we plugged in is right here. This one here plugs back into that little thing. Can't really go anywhere else. I would not recommend that you take these out. They're very difficult to get in. And to get just right, we had to take them apart because we had to clean out the insides and we had to scope to find where the mice were. But I wouldn't recommend taking these out. Just leave them in and use these and sort of unplug the electrical units right here if you're trying to take it out. It's the easiest way to do it. One last little thing that's got to go in is this piece right here. It just goes in here. It's bolted or screwed at the top and the bottom into the side of the into the side of the HVAC box, and it's right next to where the blower is going to go in, which is right back here. Okay, on this electrical conduit right here, there's 3 clips that have to plug into holes. One's right here, one's down here, plugs in the back, and then there's one down here that plugs into the back as well. Okay, we're now underneath the steering column. We're putting back some components. I have plugged in way back up in here. It's hard to see, but I plugged in one of the electrical connectors. It's white. And I've reattached this electrical line back in right here. Do not take this out. It attaches up at the top, and it'll give you nightmares if you do. But if you can undo it from this portion back here. You can undo a bolt and take it out. Reattach this and reattach this component, and we're now ready to start putting back together this piece here, which has some additional pieces on it. So we're now ready to start putting back together this thing here. Alright, so we're coming underneath the steering column, and we're gonna take a look at this piece back here, this white box right here. This white box is attached in the back there. I don't think you can quite see it, but it attaches back there with a bolt. You can just barely see that bolt. It comes up from underneath and attaches on. We disconnected this brown thing again so we could actually see it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to come and stretch this out around here and clip it back onto this one piece here. Okay, so I've added a few more components back in. I've added this cross member in, which has 2 bolts. One there, one back there. I've added this piece back on, which has a bolt up at the top here that holds these electrical components. I've also added in this bottom piece back in here right for now, which has 1 bolt and 2 bolts on this side over here. And I've also started reattaching and replugging back in electrical cables so that they're nice and secure. If they're not secure, then zip strip them. Same over here. I'm probably going to zip strip this one in because I couldn't get the actual pieces to go back in down there. Okay, a couple more pieces. This blue item clips back onto here. There's a bit of a piece sticking out from the metal that it just slides on, and it clips in there. And then you can see I've reattached this wiring harness back down below here. Popped it through. Okay, we reattached 2 plugs right here, 2 electrical plugs, and this little component that had actually popped out, it's got a little yellow end on it. It's a little bit difficult to get in, but it's a push in a certain way, and then you twist it to one side and it sort of locks back into place. Don't forget this ignition component right here as well. Okay, so as you can see, we're starting to push the dash back in. And one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to loosen up this plate, which we've done at the back here. So this one plate has to go on the outside of this thing. So we're going to loosen it up, and that means loosening this piece up. We'll just loosen enough so we can get everything back in. The other piece that's really sort of funky is this white box back here. It goes up under the VIN. It's actually attached to the back of the dash itself, and it's in a really awkward position. It goes in with 1 screw, so it's not a hard thing to put in, but you're going to have to figure out how you're going to do that and make sure there's enough loose slack in the line to get there. Like I said, it attaches underneath the dash at the back right below the VIN, and it sort of attaches in reverse too, which makes it even more difficult to access. So you're basically holding the screwdriver towards the window and screwing back towards the inside of the car. It's really sort of a funky setup. But you have to put that one back in so it doesn't rattle around as well. So we'll take a load of that. Okay, so I did a DFU because I'm not a pro. So I loosened these 2 vents back up again, and this item right here, and then I've now moved this box back to the other side where I've got lots of room so I can attach it, because it has to go in like this. It has to be attached out here so you can get a screwdriver back there, and then I'll be able to put the dashboard in. Okay, well here's this stupid thing, and right there where my finger is the bolt or the screw that has to go in, and that's how that sits there as you're putting in the dash. It's underneath the VIN plate. Looks like that. And the dash is sort of getting ready to go. The other electrical component, of course, is the airbag under the passenger side. Okay, so there's the dash in. Went in surprisingly easily. And we're going to start putting some screws in to hold it into place. Starting with 2 up at the top of the vents. So there's 2 that go in there. There's going to be 2, 1 on either side. There's 1 right sort of on either side of the steering column. There's 1 down at the very bottom down there, and there's 1 on down at the corresponding 1 down at the bottom right there. And we'll just start putting them in until we run out. The other thing is, when you're putting this dash in, you'll see that the vents don't actually perfectly line up. You can fit your fingers down through there. They sit sort of more towards the window. If you go look at the vent covers that actually slide into these things, they actually go backwards down into the openings. So we'll just, don't worry about that. Just make sure the fit is perfect and that it lines up, that these bolt components line up down there. Okay, before you get going with putting your dash in, I want you to make sure that you got your passenger side vent temperature monitor and your driver's side vent temperature monitor. Make sure those 2 pieces are in place so you can get to them when you're actually feeding through. Also make sure that your venting structure is in the right place. Okay, so you see we got the dash back in here. Went in pretty easily. We've got our 2 electrical cords up, and we've got a couple of bolts in here that are just holding it in place, or screws. There's 1 there, 1 back over here, 1 down here, and 1 here. There's another 1 bolt that goes down at the bottom there, and there's a corresponding 1 over on this side that goes down here. We're just going to hold off on that right now. The next 2 I'm going to put up are at the top here, and they go down in that hole right down in there. There's 1 on either side. Also got the cross beam back in on the steering column and everything bolted down good and snug. Make sure you bring your clock components up. They're easy to feed through here, but that's the clock electrical. Also, before you forget, underneath the glove box, make sure you plug in your passenger side airbag. And also, when you plug it in, make sure it is good and firm. You'll hear a loud snap when it goes in. Okay, there are 2 additional screws, 1 under each vent. It's just right around here. It doesn't hold the vent in. The vent just snaps in, but they hold another piece of the dash in place, so you'll have to put those 2 screws in. There's 1 right around here, and the same on the other side. And then these temperature sensors just pop right in. They just push in. The vents themselves actually snap in, and they can snap out again as well. And all of these components can be removed with upholstery tools. The kind that actually don't scratch the surfaces. Do not use a screwdriver on these. They're like $10 over at your local parts store or auto supply or hardware store. They're non-scratching interior parts removal tools, so they're just like wedges and stuff that you can pry stuff up like this from, and they won't mar or damage the surface of the